Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco Dish Out on Movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. It's just Marco here once again to talk about Dahmer, the Netflix miniseries. Now, first off, there have been like 4 or 5 Jeffrey Dahmer films so far, and then you have this miniseries. The movies are basically varying in degrees of trash because none of them really tell the true story. None of them really show what really happened because you don't know. You know, there's a lot of strange things. There's a lot of connections and just a lot of investigating that you could never do because you'll never find out. You know, it's all just terribly hidden away, and like, oh, I'll never be able to learn that, I'll never be able to see that. And there's aspects of the case like that nobody even talks about, and the biggest one that I'll talk about is the video camera, which, if you guys don't know, he had a video camera, not Gamera. What was it? I think I was thinking of Gamora because I've been playing the Guardians of the Galaxy video game to review. And so I guess I just thought, Gamora! Gamora's really hot in that video game, by the way. Like, they really amped up her hotness from the films. But he had a video camera in his... I almost did it again. What the hell? He had a video camera in his apartment. I almost said department. What is going on with me today? What is going on? Jeffrey Dahmer had a video camera in his apartment, and it was mounted on his wall like a security camera, and it was facing the living room, where he would do a lot of stuff. And it was a VHS camera. As far as I know, they quote unquote never found any VHS. Or they found VHS, but they were blank, quote unquote, blank, wink, wink. And that is a huge aspect of the case because his father was very obsessive about taking videos of his son. And I even saw, even as an adult, he's like taking these really creepy ass videos that reminded me of the ones in Peeping Tom, the 1960 movie, where he's like, Jeffrey, you can see he's really grown up well, and he's oh, you cleaned up your apartment to show us. And he's zooming in on him. It's so creepy. It's like he looks at his son like a science experiment, which that's what it was. That's another thing that we'll talk about because, and believe me, this is all just background stuff to make sure that you guys have more context for why I say the things I do about the shitty Netflix miniseries. So, that video camera, why is it there? Obviously he filmed the killings, he filmed all of that stuff, he probably filmed other stuff too. And the videos had people on it that you wouldn't want to be exposed, because then you find out, oh no, Jeffrey Dahmer was also connected to this person, to that person, to that person. And it would just open up a whole can of worms. So instead of confronting the issue, they just pretend that it doesn't exist because, what's more important? This show, the issues that this show brings up, like, did you know that gay people could not, they had to hide from people back then, it's just like the same old bullshit with these, like, hot button issues, like, we're all a bunch of victims of oppression in some varying degrees, and that's basically what this show is all about. So you have that first movie anyway. The first movie was The Secret Life of Jeffrey Dahmer. That didn't have any video camera at all, but that movie was the best one of the bunch. It was so good. The performance of the guy who played him was phenomenal. He played him so well that he really creeped me out. I mean, the movie was so creepy, it basically ruined the rest of my day, even though I've already researched him to the nth degree. And to be quite honest, he's really not that interesting to me. I mean, in terms of serial killers, you know, the fact is that a lot of them you can just put into these categories where, oh, these types of people do this, these types do that. To me, the most interesting serial killer is one who's probably was connected to Jeffrey, though. I will say that, and I'll talk about him later. And but this film was so good, The Secret Life, it still managed to like really creep me out and scare me. So I would highly recommend The Secret Life of Jeffrey Dahmer, even though it doesn't really tell the true story. And then there's like two other ones that are just like crap. Just, you know, there's one like about him as a kid or something, and I don't know. And then they have the Jeremy Renner one, which that one was crap. All it was just a regurgitation of the Wikipedia page, which is what they usually do. You know, they regurgitate the Wikipedia facts, and then they're like, wow, look, we made a serial killer movie. Here's the Jeffrey Dahmer movie. Here's the Ed Gein movie. Here's the Ted Bundy movie. And it's just all the same trash. It's basically like a formula where you read the Wikipedia page and then you just copy and paste onto film with terrible actors, terrible music, terrible directing, and terrible everything else. And then they try to do something a little different, which I really commend them for, and that is they made just a whole movie about him as a teenager, which I gotta be honest, it was pretty boring. It only had a couple of interesting things, and they were very interesting. And what I liked was that the film did not shy away from talking about these story elements that nobody else will talk about, because then, oh no, you're a conspiracy theorist. You think that everything is a conspiracy. You know, you'll get those dipshits who like to say that all the time with these, especially with serial killer cases like with, Ed Gein. You know, especially with Ed Gein, you know, all sorts of these different types of people who are obviously have more than one partner, and they had connections, and whenever you talk about that stuff, you're just automatically dismissed. And the reason is because of shows like this Dahmer show, which just came out. And so we'll get to that in a second. And one of the things about, I think, was it called My Friend Dahmer? I think it was, because that's what the comic book was. It was pretty good. It was kind of boring. It was kind of forgettable and trash, though, in other ways. But it had some really interesting things, like the thing in Washington, D.C., Jeffrey just walks up to a random payphone, and he manages to get his class into the White House and to meet with the president or the vice president. That was really creepy. And that was very bizarre. There's something very weird about that. And there's a lot of stuff like that with Jeffrey Dahmer, it's weird because normally with these killers, it's very hidden away, these connections. You know, you really have to like do your research and due diligence to find out this stuff, or to even find pictures of people and stuff like that. But with Jeffrey, it's almost like out in the open, which makes me believe that there's so many more connections and things underneath that you'd almost like go insane if you found out like the complete truth about this character and all the people who worked with him and helped him, and then about probably the victims too, and about what really happened to them to some degree. You know, it's a very sinister case, and it's a very sinister world. You know, society sort of makes everything out to be where it's all nice and everything's normal and everything is just like completely like happy, but when you look underneath, it's just like nature, where on the surface level you look at nature and say it's really pretty and it's really sexy, and oh, I'd like to go have a session, like a hot makeout session, is like on a picnic blanket in the middle of the forest, because that's really hot. But then you think about it, and it's like, nature is really creepy and gross. Like, nature has so many gross elements. All these creatures who eat each other, they're savage. They have these tiny little brains, so they don't care about suffering and pain. And there's so much about nature that parallels society, and that's one of the things. And the problem is that serial killers, the quote-unquote, they've all been reduced to mythological caricatures, to where all people think about is, oh, there are these serial killers, and they kill multiple people, and they're very scary. And were they abused, or did they just born that way? You know, that's all people think about. It's just so. It's like a basic bitch level of thinking in terms of these characters. And I say characters because they're designed that way, to where, you know, you have someone like a Lee Harvey Oswald, completely a patsy for the JFK assassination. He's a character. You know, all the stuff that they did for him, all the faking of the evidence, that fake picture with the fucking newspaper where they cut out the face and put it on, like, all that stuff that they did was to build a character, to make it look like, oh yeah, that's the bad guy. Totally. Nobody else was involved. That's the story. Now shut up and drink your fluoride water and work at your job at a fucking desk, loser. Like, that's what it is. It's in this show, you can tell that the person who made the show, Mr. American Horror Story, which I basically destroyed season 10 of American Horror Story. If you guys go check that out, it's pretty awesome. Like, he thought that he could just make, like, the worst show on the planet, and that nobody would criticize it. And I came along and I was like, you know what? This sucked. And, like, everyone freaked out. And then some people got really excited because I was actually telling the truth about that trash show. Because what happens with that show, similar to this one almost, is that it's very disconnected. The structure of the plot is terrible, confusing, jumbled. And as it goes on, they start to repeat themselves. Nothing really happens toward the end. And then the finale is always like a giant disaster. And it was almost the same with this one. Although I will say the one interesting part was that the finale of this was actually like one of the better episodes. You know, the finale felt like a perfect ending almost. There was a lot of stuff that was trash in it, though, but it really did feel like a somber, like, ending. It did feel like a good ending in comparison to all these shitty-ass American Horror Story season finales, which are like, I think that, like, American Horror Story season finales are like cancer and AIDS meets fucking Ebola virus. Like, that's how bad those fucking ass finales are. Like that shitty one with the vampires that they just did. Like, I would literally, if I had access to that script, I'd literally just like to use every single page as like a shooting target. Like, you know, just take like a shotgun and just personally shoot every single page of that trash ass finale. What was it called? Like fucking Winter Chills or Kills or some dippy ass shit. I mean, it just sucks so bad. And now let's talk about, like, let's get into this show, because I've just been delaying talking about it because I really get sick of, like, these serial killer movies and shows where they're all doing the same thing. They have a certain amount that come out every year, and they're all just in service of the agenda. And with this one, it's weird because it feels like, number one, it's to service the agenda of, this is the narrative about this person. You will believe this narrative. It is factual. It is 100% the narrative. And then, number two, it feels like the creators' personal agendas of like BLM and gay people had a hard time in the 80s and 90s. Like, that's all the show was just like, let's tell the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, the narrative story that they've contrived. And then underneath that, let's also tell the story of these political, social agendas that are a hot topic right now. And it feels like, oh, maybe in 10 years, they'll make another Jeffrey Dahmer movie where it's all about another political agenda issue. Like, maybe they'll tell a Ted Bundy movie and it'll be all about the Me Too movement. And then they'll make an Eileen Wuornos movie and it'll be all about rape culture and all that bullshit. That's what it feels like with this show, is that like, and the reason why I say that too is just because I can see the mechanics of the filmmaking behind it, and I can see especially the emphasis that they placed on certain victims over other victims, and how the stories that they told were different for each one, in terms of, you could tell that the writers didn't care about certain victims. They only cared about like two of them, and it was really strange. And then, like, as the show went on, they emphasized these certain elements of the show, of the narrative, to fit their agenda. Excuse me, sorry. And, like, one of them was the whole police thing, and, of course, that was horrible. But the fact is that those police bringing Conorak back to Jeffrey's apartment, the teenage boy who he drilled holes into his head, terrible, horrible. The police bringing him back had nothing to do with homophobia, quote-unquote homophobia, or racism. It had to do with the police having an involvement in Jeffrey's killings, and the police personally handing back a victim and saying, oh, we don't care about this. He escaped. Here you go. Here's your meal, predator, and now go eat. Like, that's what it was. And so I really despise the fact that they took that horrible, evil, sinister event that, it's really insane that, like, something like that happened. But it's horrible that, like, the people who made this show took that event and then twisted it around to be like, oh my God, evil police, racist police, homophobic police. Like, that's what they all made it about. Like, that's all that it was to these people who created this show. It wasn't about handing back a victim to a serial killer. It was about, oh my God, these police are homophobic and they're racist. Like, that's what it was all about. And then you see this cringeworthy scene near the end of the series where the police are given, like, these accommodations, which, you know why they were commended, though, because they did their job in helping Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, that's literally why they were commended in real life. But they framed it to where they go up there and then they make them into these shadowy figures, because they're trying to tell you that, see, this is what all cops are like. They're all these horrible monster, racist, homophobes, and it's institutional problems. And it's just an oversimplification on purpose to service this lone killer narrative, and to distract to distract too and to sow division. And that's another thing, is that all this show does is just encourage division. And you notice that with a lot of these movies nowadays that have to do with any race-related issues, that's all they do, is just have this divisive angle to them where it's like, see, this is what it's been like all along, and you guys need to rise up and do this, this, and this. And, you know, there are exceptions like Green Book. That was a good movie, like a comforting, like, Christmas time type of movie. But really, I mean, it's just terrible. And this show, that's what it all is. Because near the end, all they focus on is, like, these certain issues. And it's like, why are we focusing on this when, you know, it boggles my mind how they showed all these unnecessary, asinine scenes that just dragged on and on and on, and they were just the same old scenes over and over and over again. And meanwhile, you have the information you can actually research in real life, and it's so much more interesting than this dull crap, okay? He had so many connections, it's not even funny. For instance, one of the bars that he frequented, like a decade earlier, John Wayne Gacy would go to that same bar. It was like a tavern or something. And by the way, if you want to really research Jeffrey Dahmer, if you want to know the true story for real, then just go to Lolfieldandlove, his channel. Of course, I always promote that channel whenever I talk about serial killer movies or shows, because it's just the same. Like, every year we have, what do we have? A John Wayne Gacy movie, a Ted Bundy movie, or a Jeffrey Dahmer movie, or a Ed Gein movie, a Charles Manson movie, or a Lee Harvey Oswald movie. Every single year, it is just the same old shit. It's like, I'm so sick and tired of it. Like, I swear to God, if I see in the next week, oh my God, look, it's the new trailer for the Ted Bundy movie. Oh my God, look, he's so scary. You guys, you've never heard this story before. It's like, I'm just gonna fucking break the computer, because it's like, I'm so sick and tired of it. It's just such a waste of time, because they never actually tell the true story. They just tell, like, the Wikipedia page, and they call it a day. And it was the same thing for this show. And they took so many elements of the true story and they twisted them to fit their own agendas, and they made it into this, like, a completely different story than it actually was in real life. And it's just so retarded, honestly. It's really retarded what they did with this story. It just became so apparent. It became so apparent by the end of this season that, like, you know, there was a guy in the army who was assaulted by Jeffrey, like, over and over and over again for, like, a year. And they've, like, focused on that for, like, 2 seconds. And then they focus on someone else for, like, a whole hour. And it's like, what the fuck? It's like, this show's priorities are whack. Like, the structure, the plot structure of this show is so bad. This show's plot structure is probably the worst structure I've ever seen in a television show in history. This show jumps around. It jumps back and forth, sideways, slantways. Remember Willy Wonka when he takes Charlie into the glass elevator? Like, that's what this show is. It's fucking all over the place. And it's like, how am I supposed to follow this? Just imagine if I'm like a normie and I'm watching this show. I'd never be able to follow it. The reason why they're doing that is because they want to confuse you and throw all this crap all over the place, But then they want to have these little through lines. They had these couple little through line agendas that they wanted to make sure that you got the agenda. And another one of those agendas was Lionel Dahmer, which guys, if you've never seen an interview of Lionel Dahmer, he is so creepy. He is creepier than Jeffrey Dahmer. He is creepier than Ted Bundy. He is creepy. He's on the level of John Wayne Gacy. He is so creepy that when I watched an interview with him and Jeffrey, the guy that I was more creeped out by was him. And there's a reason. He has connections. He has this video camera obsession. There's lots of stuff that you could find out about him. And this whole series, it almost felt like one of the agendas was to make sure that you did not blame him, Lionel, that you blamed the mom. Because the mom was an absentee parent, and she called her children her nemesis. It felt like this was all to make it like... And this is what they tried to do back then as well. They had these allegations, and then instead of investigating those allegations and taking them seriously, they were all dismissed, and it was treated like, oh no, of course it couldn't be that. You're just, no, it's not that at all. And one of those was, of course, displayed on the show. And the way that they displayed this allegation was very, very sinister, because it made sure to frame it in the way that you would not believe anything about this allegation. And so what happened was, there were multiple people who not only said that Jeffrey was abused as a boy by an older neighborhood boy, but there were also allegations that his father sexually abused him, probably abused him in other ways as well, which I don't know. I'm not even gonna. But those are the allegations, is just what I'm saying. And they had this show where this one guy alleged these things, and they had it to where he had these like windows that made him like blurry, and it looked kind of like a shower type of door where it's like all foggy and things. It looks kind of like a foggy like stone design. And then there was this woman, and the woman knew Jeffrey's parents and knew his step-parent as well. And she not only confirmed that what this guy was saying was true, but she also elaborated on them. Like, she elaborated on the fact that the stepmom, is what she said, was the epitome of evil stepmother. She was a wicked stepmother. And then the guy, of course, had told her about the father's abuse, allegedly. And so, in the show, what did they do? All they do is just show one man, and they show it to where there's no white window, but instead he's in shadow, and they make him into this black, shadowy figure. And the way that he's talking, they make it come across, and then they also make his voice sound like, I am an evil person, and I am gonna cough. And they did that to his voice. And so what they were doing there was they were making it look like this guy's just an attention whore. And they're just making like, oh, this guy, there's no way he's telling the truth. He's just there for attention. He's this evil, shadowy figure. And it's like, just if you compare that example all by itself, it raises so many other questions about the series as a whole. Because if they misrepresented that, what else in the show did they misrepresent? Everything, basically. That's, in my opinion, everything in this show is a misrepresentation of reality. It's a purposeful misrepresentation to further the agenda and to make sure that the narrative is drilled into your head. So, that right there, I mean, that should be like, okay, this show, I shouldn't take this seriously. Well, what about the entertainment value? This show bored the living hell out of me. I mean, I was having trouble staying awake watching this show. I was like on the verge of just like I was so ready to fall asleep. It's not even funny. And it was painful watching this crap. There were a couple exceptions. I would say the best episode, and now here's the thing too, the best episode was probably episode 6, which was all about Tony Hughes, the deaf man. And the reason why I thought that was the best was because it focused just on one story. And so you didn't have this jumping around, until the end. And the ending was the worst part, because that's when they started jumping around, when they started just going, whoop, doop, 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 doop. The rest of the episode was better, though, because it was focused. And that was the problem with the show. One of the many problems was that it was not focused. It was all over the place, and that made it boring as hell. Another thing is, I would have to agree that, this show, it was pretty bad in terms of, like, the victims' families as well. Because it reminded me a lot of extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile. Like, even though that movie was good, you could tell that what they were doing was really creepy and gross, where they turned Ted Bundy into, like, this romantic figure. But they were doing it for a purpose, though. That's why I gave them a pass. They made Ted Bundy into, like, this Zac Efron romantic figure because they're trying to make you realize that that's how he was able to do what he did so well. And it was very, very effective because it's Zac Efron. And so it's like, okay, I can see now. Like, it's clear. It's very, very clear. And it was all purposeful. It was not to, like, do anything sinister. But in this series, I could definitely feel, like, a very creepy vibe. Especially if I were related to someone who was killed by Jeffrey. Because it had similar things to what they did in Shockingly Evil. They had this sequence where Ted Bundy, he gets strip searched, and I think they show him naked again, and they just show him fully naked. And it's like, they never do that nowadays, because nowadays they're concerned with male gaze. And so, that's pretty frowned upon, to show somebody fully naked, because it's like, it's not necessary. It's bad. Toxic men. It's looked at as a bad thing that you shouldn't do. And in this show, they make sure to show him fully naked, that's for sure. And the reason in this show was, it's not like the reason was to show, like, he humiliated his victims, he would do all this stuff to them, now he's getting humiliated in front of these police. That wasn't the point of the scene. The point of the scene was, oh my God, look, it's Evan Peters naked. Oh my God, aren't you thirsty for Evan Peters butter biscuits? Oh yeah. Or you want to know what John Wayne Gacy was like in this show? Because that was the other part. In the same way that Shockingly Evil it almost felt like they were setting up like a serial killer cinematic universe. They did the same thing in this show, to where they talked about Ed Gein, and they showed him, and it's like, ooh, look, it's the Easter egg! It's the serial killer universe Easter egg! It's Ed Gein! Oh my god! I just saw his face for one split second, and he talked! And then they showed John Wayne Gacy, and they actually showed like a whole unnecessary scene where he's in the process of killing a guy, and he literally is like, yeah, so you're interested in contractor work? And it's like, I'm not kidding, guys. Like, that is how John Wayne Gacy talks in the show. Like, he's like, the only knot that I remember from the Boy Scouts, is the tourniquet knot. It's like he is just like coming, like, like the way that actor portrayed John Wayne Gacy. It was like he was in a non-stop process of orgasming. Like he learned how to do some tantra. He learned the tantric arts. Like, remember that scene in American Pie 2 when Finchy Poo, when he was like watering the plant, and he was like, and he was like doing that on purpose so that he could become the master of tantric arts. Like, that's what John Wayne Gacy was like in this show. It was so weird. It was like, oh yeah, here's an RC Cola. Oh, what did you think it is? Like that's what he acted like. It was so bizarre. It was like, this has to be a parody, or it has to just be so insulting that it's like, okay, you can see what they're doing here. It's like they're setting up this universe to where now, oh my god, why don't they make an Ed Gein series? Oh my god, why don't they make a John Wayne Gacy miniseries? That's what it felt like to me. So I would kind of agree. You know, when you look at serial killer movies and shows, what you have to look at is intent. And the intent of this show was agendas and narratives. And so, and the way that they portrayed Jeffrey Dahmer too, like, oh my god, the creator of American Horror Story, he's got oh god, man, like he's got some sort of he's got like a boner for Jeffrey Dahmer that's the size of the Washington Monument. Like, like the way that he is portrayed in this show is like he's some sort of like a cutesy teen romantic figure where he's like, oh my god, don't you guys feel sorry for this little twink? Don't you feel sorry for this, like, oh no, he's so tragic. Oh my god, his childhood. Oh, what was wrong with him? Oh, I want to fix him so bad. Like, he was like a romance figure for like fucking weirdos on Tumblr posts to talk about and to write fan fiction and to fucking make little shitty ass animated pictures, like, you know, little pictures of him naked, like with with one of these shitty Tumblr users. It was weird. It was very, very weird the way that they portrayed Jeffrey Dahmer in this show. You know, another guy, he said something that I agree with when I thought about it. He said that, like, this was like Jeffrey Dahmer, the Napoleon Dynamite version. He even walks like Napoleon Dynamite. I mean, it was like, like, remember the scene in Napoleon Dynamite where where he's doing the little butterfly dance in that one class. Like, that's what Jeffrey Dahmer looks like this entire series. He looks like Napoleon Dynamite in that scene. And he's like, my name is Jeffrey Dahmer, and you wanna come back to my place for a beer? You wanna come back to my place and do stuff together? Like, that's what he talked like the entire season. It was so weird. I was like, why? And then you had Glenda Cleveland, and her character was basically the main character to service the agenda of the show. And I felt bad because I thought that, the real story is really terrifying, and the fact that, she had to live in this place and smell these smells and hear these noises, it's really, really scary, honestly. Like, they could have just made a whole series about her, but they probably didn't want to pay her anything to do that, so they didn't. And the actress who played her, she was also on Monk. And so I got really excited when I saw that she was on the show. I thought I had recognized her, and I was like, oh yeah, it's the actress from Monk. And she played a really funny character on that show. And I would also say that another standout episode was episode 7, where it was all about finding out, like, her side of the story. And it was basically like a series of interactions between her and Jeff. And especially the scene where he comes over and gives her a sandwich. They knew that scene would be very popular. Because it reminded me, too, of, like, that shitty-ass piece of shit Nurse Ratched show, where they had the peach scene, like, why are you eating my peach? That whole scene that they memed and talk about from the trailers. It was like the same thing, but with a pulled pork sandwich in this show. But, the pulled pork was not pulled pork. That scene was a standout scene. I thought just, though, the stuff that they omitted was weird. There were so many important details and important stories that they omitted. Like, the biggest one that, like, nobody has ever shown or talked about was how this one girl went over to Jeffrey's house late at night, and he went into the basement with his family, and they were doing a satanic ritual in the basement together. And she left, and that's when she ran the fuck out and left and said, bye-bye. And, that's pretty terrifying. I mean, because in the show, they portray it as like, oh, it was only Jeffrey who had the little obsession with the Satanism, and he built an altar as a teenager, and, they portrayed it as like, oh, that never happened. And it was like, see, that's another example of, like, they took all these instances of connections of, like, things that point to other stories that didn't have anything to do with the one they wanted to tell, and they didn't tell those parts of the story on purpose, because they knew that would lead that would lead people down other avenues of research. So I think I'm almost about done. I'm just trying to think. Well, also, Evan Peters, I really wanted to support Evan Peters. That's kind of why I watched the show. I really wasn't interested in seeing another Wikipedia page regurgitation, but I wanted to support Evan Peters because he is a really, really good actor. It's just that the performance that he put on, he did the accent right, but the way that he portrayed the character, nobody would have ever gone home with that guy. Nobody in their right mind would have ever gone home with Evan Peters as Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, he plays him like you'd expect that he'd be, knowing that he's a serial killer. The reason why the guy in that Secret Life movie was so good is because he played both sides. You could picture him as just like a normal guy. You know, he's a little weird, I guess, but you could picture someone going home with him to take some pictures. Boom, he's killed. Not with Evan Peters as Jeffrey Dahmer in the slightest. I mean, he plays him like a mythological figure that people have made him out to be. And another thing is that he's very short. And I think that was also another, mistake, was that, Jeffrey Dahmer was taller. He was not a shrimp. He was not a little shrimp they made him look like a boy. They made him look like sort of like an overgrown boy who's been like, I don't know, like it's really weird. I really despise it. It's like really, really weird what they did, honestly. I really don't like it at all. I think it's very, very bad, and it's just, ugh. And the fact that it's become so popular, too, ugh, that's not a good sign. It just shows that, the people who are smart enough to do research and find out the truth, they'll be the ones doing research and figuring out the real things, and then all the rest of the people will just be sitting there in their bedroom fucking writing fan fiction about their little love affair with the serial killer, So, and the last thing before I get to my review and my ratings is, he had these connections that are never touched upon, of course. And one of those connections is that the books that he had in his apartment, he had a book about Dennis Nielsen, which they mentioned that book on the show. They mentioned that book. He had that book in his apartment. He had Killing for Company in his apartment. And then he had a book about Larry Eiler. If you guys don't know, Larry Eiler is Jeffrey Dahmer with a mustache and with a dopey-ass Dwight Schrute-looking face. Oh, what's that? It's a huge-ass yellow truck. I don't know what it's doing. Maybe they're mad that I'm doing this video, so they're like, uh-oh, should we Epstein him, and should we take his phone and destroy his recording? Like they're going on a little secret mission now, or no, maybe that truck they're listening in. I'm just kidding. So Larry Eiler, he would do the same things Jeffrey Dahmer would do. In fact, that's another thing too, is why they would show Ed Gein, John Wayne Gacy. These killers are not as relevant to Jeffrey Dahmer as other serial killers who had the same motives, the same way that they kill people, all these similarities that they didn't show them. Why? Because those killers aren't as popular as Ed Gein and John Wayne Gacy. So they were like, oh, people won't care about that. They want their serial killer Easter eggs to be the popular ones. So he also had Larry Eiler's book. Larry would, one of the things he would do, he would take people into the forest and kill them and rape them and everything. And he worked with a guy named Robert David Little. And he was this college professor, and he actually lived with Larry Eiler, and they would kill people together and rape them together, allegedly. And it's pretty creepy because, that was a case where they found the connection, but then Robert David Little got away with it, of course. And then Larry Eiler mysteriously died in prison of AIDS. And then you have another killer who I just found out about today while researching for this video, Joe Dressler. And Joe Dressler worked on Dahmer's elevator twice while he was living there. And you could definitely probably speculate that he killed people with Jeffrey Dahmer. A lot of these victims, you could probably say, multiple people killed them, not just Jeffrey. It was not a lone killer in all instances. And then, of course, the one that I've researched the most, because he is the most interesting, he is the most terrifying, he is the person who, he has some really weird stuff going on about him. And that is Herb Baumeister. Now, he would do the exact same thing that Jeffrey would do. He would go to bars, he would drug people, he would take them back to his mansion in the middle of nowhere, he would strangle them to death, he would kill them, he would mutilate them, all the same things that Jeffrey Dahmer would do. But even, there's a lot of stuff about him. I don't even want to get into it because you could just go on for hours. I mean, I've read and watched and listened to everything there is to know about Herb Baumeister, and still we'll never know the true story unless we dig deeper than that. And it is very likely that he was connected to Larry Eiler. Another thing is that he also had a video camera situation where he had a place to put a video camera, he had videotapes of his killings, and he was going to turn those in to the authorities in Canada before he was mysteriously killed by his partner. He, quote-unquote, committed suicide. And then all the evidence suddenly disappeared. And Larry Eiler, he said that Robert David Little take all these pictures while they would do that killing. They talked about this one specific instance. And so, it's a very, very strange thing. All these killers, there's this element of taking pictures, taking videos, and the reason why that's not touched upon in this show is because people did not want to admit to the fact that snuff films and snuff pictures exist. And so it's all just gonna, they'll ignore it and pretend like, oh, it never happened. Snuff movies don't exist. So that's that. And I would rate the show, I give it, the first 2 episodes, I give B minuses because, there is some good suspense, even though that it's not accurate, and, there are these long sequences where it's just Jeffrey and his victim. And it's that's the most interesting part, because it's what's going to happen. That this guy's evil, this guy's just some random guy, and they're suspenseful sequences. But then episode 3 is basically My Friend Dahmer, the shitty version. Episode 4 is just an extension of that. Episode 5 is okay. Episode 6 is an A minus. Episode 7 is a B plus. Episode 8 is a D minus. I mean, that's where it really started to, because they only showed the trial for a minute, and then episode 9 was a D minus, and episode 10 was, I don't know, a B. That was another thing too. I would have to say that the guy who ends up killing Jeffrey in prison, I thought that he probably did one of the best jobs at acting. He actually came across as scarier than Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, he was able to play it to where he had this normal side and this really creepy, evil, psychotic side. And I thought that he did a really good job. The guy who played Tony Hughes did a really good job. The guy who played Lionel, even though the part was, still, it's they're just going to forever cover up the truth about Lionel. I mean, he is a Dr. Frankenstein type of character. And he is, the way that he comes across in interviews is so terrifying. that, I was weirded out because the actor who plays him in this show, for some reason, he did a perfect impression of him, but he didn't manage to do the creepiness. And so I wondered if that was maybe like he could play him as creepy and he chose not to, or he just wasn't able to. But he did a good job. Of course, Glenda Cleveland did a good job. And then Evan Peters, he was not right for the part. He did the best job that he could. I mean, he really, really tried. He did a great job in his own way, but he was playing a caricature, and he was playing somebody that nobody would go home with at all. Even with, John Wayne Gacy, Mr. Oh, I'm coming. Even him, like, nobody would go home with him. Now, with Ed Gein, it's different because nobody went home with Ed Gein. Ed Gein took people home. Like, Ed Gein did not take women home. They did not come with him, their own, they were, he was like, and that's the other thing, too, was that all these people are mentally ill, and I don't understand why none of them went to insane asylums. Like, the fact that they all were in prison, the reason why is because if they're in prison, it's easier to kill them. Like with the Boston Strangler, right before he was going to give away who actually did the murders, he gets mysteriously killed in prison. And it's a pattern with these people of they go to prison, the narrative about them is formed, and then suddenly they get killed. And it's like Jeffrey Epstein, where it's like, oh, yeah, oh, of course, Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. Wink, wink. No, he didn't. Not at all. He was killed so that he would not give up other people connected to the case. So anyways, I would give this series, it's a really mixed bag because I would never watch it again. That's the problem. Maybe I've watched, no. It also has like this very dull, depressing vibe to it. That it has like this wannabe, edgy feeling to it. I'd never watch this again. It's just nowhere near as good. I'm surprised because the guy who did American Horror Story, the reason why he does these true story things is it all started with the OJ series. And I actually thought the OJ series was really good. I thought that was like a really, really good true story series, even though obviously they didn't really go down any conspiratorial avenues with that, which there were a lot of, believe me. It was still a really, really good show, and the time jumps that they did, they made sense. They didn't jump around every episode, but they made sense. The ones in this show didn't make sense at all. I knew what they were trying to do, but they didn't make sense. What they were trying to do was, they were trying to show you all these things that he did in the first 5 episodes. It was all to set up episode 6. It was all to do that, because then in episode 6, it's this whole suspenseful buildup where you're seeing all these things that he's done before being applied to this one person, and you're seeing like oh yeah, and Conorak's father did a good job as well. I thought that he was a good actor as well. But that was the whole purpose of the time jumping thing, and it was totally stupid. What a dumb decision. I can't give this series really a food rating because it's so all over the place that, like, I really don't know that there's a food in existence that is as confusing as this show. So I'm just going to give the show an F- because it was unnecessary. If you're not going to tell the true story, if you're going to leave out evidence, if you're going to misconstrue evidence to fit your narratives, it's just not worth it. It's just not. Like, I'll go do my own research like a loser. I'll just I'll just go off and like, oh, I'm going to listen to a video now about the real story that happened. I'll just go do that, honestly, because like I don't need to watch teeny Tumblr romance Jeffrey Dahmer and his tragic life story. I don't need to watch that. I don't want to watch that. It's stupid. And co-starring the 2022 agendas that everyone always talks about. So anyways, please like this video, comment, tell me what you thought of this shitty show, and then please subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more honest reviews. Goodbye, everybody. See you soon.